Good morning and welcome to Madeira. If you're new around here, hi, I'm Caroline and I'm travelling around this gorgeous island for 2 weeks with my partner Andy. This morning we've driven just a few short minutes up the hillside to a levada called Levada Castelejo, and we are going to be hiking along this for, I think it's somewhere between about 5 to 6 kilometres, and then when we get to the end we will be able to make a decision as to whether we hike way up the hillside to another levada to bring us back to the car, or if we just hike back along this levada. Given that we did the epic Pico do Arriero to the Pico Ruivo hike yesterday, we are feeling a little bit on the exhausted side, so if I had to put my money on it, I think we'll probably just come straight back along this one. But either which way, I am so grateful that it's a little bit overcast, because yesterday the sun really got to me, and I'm really grateful for clouds this morning. What an eventful start to this hike. No sooner had we got down onto the levada, the winds just pushed in a whole load of rain clouds off of the ocean. But not only that, I thought, and obviously I was very wrong to have thought this, but I thought that this hike wasn't one of the more popular ones. But when we've rocked up, there's been not one, not two, but 3 minibuses that have brought a group of hikers, and a group has gone off just in front of us. We've come across a dog, and at first it started growling at me, and then it started barking, but when it was barking it seemed to be wagging its tail. So we've kind of taken a little bit of a detour to get around said dog because of the growling at the very start. This Levada walk started in a village, which is unlike most of the Levada walks that we've done. One thing that we've picked up on is that they've got these almost street lights on it, so we're assuming that the locals must use this as a way to get from A to B when on foot. We've really not made much headway on this walk, but it is well and truly getting my stamp of approval. Most of the Levada walks that we've done so far have been very enclosed, way away from any kind of civilization, and in really thick trees and bushes, so you've not had much in the way of views. The only exception to that was the Levada Nueva and Levada Moinho loop that we did as our very first Levada walk, but that had a very different feel to it because it was on the southern side. It just had a much sort of warmer, almost Mediterranean climate feel to it, whereas this one, we're in civilization. We are walking around the backs of people's homes, and you can look down into the valley and see their land and the vegetable patches and the chicken coops, and you've got things like stairwells that are coming down to the levada, cross over the levada and keep on going. And whilst we've seen that with things like the mountain biking trails, it's really cool just to understand, like when neighbours are trying to get maybe from their house to a friend's house to like socialise or something, they actually use these levadas and they use these stairwells. I do hope that this cloud cover stays here. Andy and I were just discussing it as we were wandering around, that yesterday when we were up at the Pico do Arriero for the sunrise, you could see the clouds because we were well up above them in a cloud inversion, and there were these pockets of valleys where the cloud got themselves right into those valleys, and we are wondering if perhaps we're in one of those ones at the moment. The host at our hostel was saying this area of the island does tend to be cloudy most of the time because of those mountains. It stops the cloud from being able to get over them, and it just kind of hangs here. So we'll keep our fingers crossed. Stay put, cloud. The flora on this hike is lovely. We've seen on the side of the road when we've been driving around these yellow flowers that I had been thinking to myself, I've not seen any on the Levada walks, but this one's had loads of them. And then there's also these purpley green succulents that are growing out of the rock face on the upper side of the Levada walls. There are of course plenty of other flowers that we've seen on other Levada walks, such as those fiery red orange flowers. We've got the sugar canes, we've got loads of ferns, and it seems like here the hydrangeas, instead of growing wild, seem to have been planted in people's gardens, but we are coming across those too. As for the fauna, it definitely exists, it's just that they're very skittish. So I have seen plenty of butterflies, but they're usually quite quick to fly away, and I can hear lizards. They're like in the upper sections of the Levada Walk, you just hear it all scurrying away, and every now and again they scurry so quickly that they push some loose soil into the Levada and then it goes plop into the water. And then you've got the sound of the bird song. It's just that obviously the flora is very easy to come across because it doesn't move, whereas the fauna are a lot more difficult to get. The opposite. We've been through so many tunnels whilst hiking now, and if there's one thing that I've picked up on is that there are a lot of spiders' webs that are at the top of them. So even if they feel high enough that you're not going to bump into the roof, I still always duck because I really don't want to have to wander into one of them. Oops, I've just gone and walked past what I thought was like an old shed. Had no idea that anything was in there, and I think it's like a goat or two, and one of them just scared the living daylights out of me by bleating away. When you think it's empty and he's gone on ahead to take some photographs and you're on your own, oh, just catching my breath for a moment. Oh dear, we've not had the best of track records when it comes to animals on this walk, and there's not one, not two, but 3 dogs all guarding this house behind us. And the second we walked around this corner, all of their heads just went from being down to like, yes. We'll see what happens as we walk past them. Oh, that's too funny, not a single bark from any of them. 2 just ran back up the steps, and then the other one really couldn't have cared less. He just put his head back down and kept it down the whole way. He was actually really cute. I don't know if they were designed to be guard dogs, but if they were, they're not very good. If they're designed to be really cute, cuddly pets, awesome job, guys. We've barely made a dent on this hike, so a very quick lunch, and we're going to keep on going. But one thing that is worth mentioning is that the view out in the distance was absolutely spectacular. You could see
Porto Santo,
the other island whose name I can never quite remember, that people live on here in Madeira. And then we've just been sat by someone's back garden where they're growing food, so we can see sweet corn on the cobs that are being grown. And you were saying these closest were
courgettes, although they're letting them grow into marrow by the looks of it.
And then cherry trees potentially. Lovely place to stop. Not a single soul has walked by, so I've got a feeling that maybe those tour groups earlier are actually doing point to point and they're getting picked up at the other end, so we may have this hike to ourselves, with the exception of that one local woman who I passed earlier.
Yeah.
We've just passed a really cute dog on the trail. We don't think that it's a stray because it had a collar on, but its owner is nowhere to be seen. At least the animal's getting a little bit more friendly though as we go. The sun's come out, so the lizards have all come out in full force, and what's really cool is that they sit right on the corner of the Levada pathway, and I think it's because when we come past, because of how skittish they all then run back down the side of the Levada wall. But because I'm obviously filming things, what I've noticed is that once we're gone, they just come straight back out again. I think we must have now come round to the next village because there was a stretch back there where it was really overgrown and there were a lot of plants sticking out across the Levada walkway, whereas here it's beautifully clear. But again, we're walking past people's houses, so I think this just takes you from village to village with epic views as you go. We've just crossed a road that had a whole load of parked cars alongside it, and on the other side of the road there was a very official looking Levada sign saying that it's going to be 4.4 kilometers along this Levada, and then further on it had like the official map, and where we parked up it was completely devoid of any of that like official signage, which has made us realise that we have started this walk at the wrong point. So it's going to end up being a much longer hike. Now the good news is that I thoroughly enjoyed that section that we hadn't planned on doing, so there's no regrets there, but because we are now doing a much longer hike than what we'd first envisaged, it means that before, when I was a bit like we might go up the hill and join onto another Levada to loop back, we're not going to do that. We are just going to be coming back the same way as what we've gone out. Certainly for the first part of the correct part of the walk, it's feeling not too dissimilar to a lot of the other Levada walks that we've done in that it's pushing us straight up into a valley. The biggest difference is probably the lack of trees and bushes, so that has remained the same as the earlier on part of this walk. We're able to look up onto the other side of the valley to where there's a whole load of houses, and I've watched as buses have really struggled to navigate the tight turns, and it's made me realise that this was obviously the road that we drove up and back down when we did Pico do Arriero yesterday, but I think we're going to be walking further away from that settlement into a bit more of the wilds. This Levada is incredibly full, almost to the point of it overspilling, and in fairness, in the odd section it already has. And it's now leaving me wondering, in the winter after really heavy rains, do these overflow and is there a lot of wasted water? Even though we're walking up a valley, there are several valleys that go off the side of that one, and naturally the Levada has to go in and then back out of every single one of those, and in a lot of them we've come across these cables, and the last one that we got to, it's got an aerial tramway attached to the cable, but we just assumed that none of them were working anymore, but you could really clearly see the machinery that had been covered over, just I guess to protect it from the elements whilst it's not being used, and also one of the actual trams that helps to be able to take goods up and down I suppose the valley cliff face. I can always tell now on these Levada walks how much further we've got until the very end, just because when we're quite close to the end, the stream in the valley suddenly comes right up almost to the level of the Levada that we're walking along, so I reckon about 5 more minutes. There's some kind of dam, and obviously when the winter rains have calmed down and the water hasn't been gushing enough to come over the dam, it's been deep enough on the other side for there to be quite a pool collected of water, and there's a whole load of trout that have got stuck in there, and I'm guessing, because it's like the beginning of August now, that they're probably going to be stuck in there until the winter rains come, because at the moment all of the water's being diverted on this side through the Levada, so it is going to be quite some time before this, I suppose, bouldery, dry riverbed becomes a running river again. I don't know if the trout will actually survive that long in such a small space. The 4.4 kilometre trail seems to bring you out as far as this bridge. The bridge is quite unique, don't get me wrong, it's very different to most bridges that I've ever been on, way more bouncy, and then there's like 4 slabs of wood and then a gap before the next 4. It doesn't bring you out at a really epic waterfall, which is what I found most of the Levada hikes that we've done so far to have brought you out at, and instead it's just a few trickling ones with said bridge. Now, if we do go across it, the elevation gain gets quite steep, and I believe that's going to take you up to the alternative Levada. I personally think that us having parked at the wrong starting point of this walk was actually quite a blessing in disguise. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong and not nice about this section of the hike, the 4.4 kilometers, but I do feel like there's been an awful lot of sameness in comparison to other Levada walks that we've done earlier on in our trip. So it's a big valley, lots of greenery, there's odd points where you can look out onto the valley, but really you're just walking in amongst nature. And for me personally, based on the Levada walks that we've done so far this trip, I felt like the first part of it, where we were getting to actually walk at the back of the villages, getting to walk right on the edges of people's back gardens and seeing the things that they were growing, and also having the views out over the ocean, over that huge rock, way out onto the other island that I can never remember the name of. That was so unique and completely different to any of the other hikes that we've done. So for me personally, I'm not saying don't come and do this hike. I just think that you also probably would want to start the hike at the other point, the unofficial point. And what I will do is I will leave in the comments some kind of coordinates to let you know exactly where we parked up, so that you can get that first part of the hike that we also experienced today.